consistency and touch-up. But what we'll do first is we'll have a look at what we did in the last lecture, the speed-ups. I did something there that I didn't explain yet. So for example, I added some shadow on the inside here. I think that made sense. And another thing is that I made some greenish stuff, some ivy or plants. For that I used in the stroke method here, I used the jitter. I put the jitter on 10 pixels. So let's zoom in a bit and let's explain that. So when you put the jitter on 10, and let me make the color red. So the jitter is on 10, and when I draw something in now, you can see it splatters the colors all over the place. And that's what I used to make these plants. There is another way as well. You can also use the space, so Control Z, and let me go and set jitter on 0 again and set space on 175. And now when you draw something, you get a similar thing, but it works just a little bit different. Both work fine, it's just a matter of personal preference, what you like best. So either you set spacing on, oops, sorry. Let me put that in view again. So either you set space on 175, and you get something like this. And Control Z, let's put it back on 10%, or you can put the jitter on 10, and you get something like this. So I recommend you try them both. Put space on 175 or put jitter on 10. And try it out. Okay, Control Z, let's put jitter back on 0. Spacing is on 10%, that's the default value. Okay, I think that's all I did, so let's go and continue with the consistency and touch-up. So one tip I have is when you want to have everything consistent, you go to your texture and have a look at it. And it's very easy to see the consistency in a texture like this. It's pretty hard on a model because you see only half of it. You see only one side of it. So overall I think it looks pretty good. There must be something wrong, let me see. One thing I see is that this part of this beam here is a little bit darker than the rest. So I could fix that, but I don't think it's a real problem. So let's just leave it like this. Let's hit Control Space and go back to our model. The next thing what you see is I made some damage here. That's because I can imagine something or someone throwing a bucket in and pulling it out again and then damaging the bricks there. But what I noticed from looking at some reference material is that often the parts of the bricks that are most used are a little bit darker as well. It's probably from people touching it or from the water leaking out of buckets or whatever. So let's make that part a little bit darker. So let's pick a color here. Let's make it darker. And then Alt-A deselect everything, and with L select the base. Shift-H to hide the top of the well. And zoom in a bit and let's make this just a little bit darker. I do this with a soft brush. And make sure occlude and backface color are turned on, so you don't paint through everything. And let's make it just a tad darker. The other side as well. Here, there, and not everywhere. Okay. Okay. Maybe a bit more here, like so, and here as well. So the inner part is maybe a little bit wetter. Alt-H, let's have a look. That's pretty good. Maybe a little bit more on the sides. So here and there, just a tiny little bit. Okay, that looks a lot better, I think. Another thing I was looking at was that the roof is a little bit too brown maybe, or orange. It could use a little bit more green because the well is standing in the woods. And if you remember from the painting with the photo, the reference with the dog in the wood, even the dog would turn green, so it could use a little bit more green. We can do that with a gradient, but there's a little problem with the gradient in this version of Blender. So for now I'll do it with a brush, but don't worry, I'll do a gradient later on in this lecture and explain how you can work around the bug in this version. Anyway, let's pick a green color. Let's make sure occlude and backface color is in this case turned off so we can paint through everything. Let's test that. Yep. Control Z, go to front view with numpad 1 and then numpad 6 3 times, so we can paint the sides as well. Let's have a look. Let's put the strength on 0.7, that's good. And let's just, with a little bit of a bigger brush, throw over there 1 and 2 times, for example. It should be enough. Don't do the roof because there's a lot of light coming on there and I choose not to make that green. Maybe not physically correct, but well, I just like it so. That's pretty green. Let's do a Control Z to look what it was. Maybe it's too green, so maybe I'll just do a Control Z once, so it's just one stroke. Because I think it's just a little bit too green with 2 strokes. This is enough, just very subtle, but it's just a little bit greener. I like that a lot. Now I'd also like to add some ambient occlusion to the bottom of the beams. So let me zoom in. And what I want to do is I want to have the light from the bricks reflecting or shining on the bottom of the beams. Just a little bit. So let's, with the soft brush, color pick the color. And very softly, with a small brush, paint some gray in there. Just a little bit. Just on the darker part below here as well. Maybe you think, well, it's just something I don't see or whatever, but sometimes when you look at a model you think something's off, and tiny details like this can fix that. So that's why I'm showing this. And on my model the contrast between the tiles and the wood here is pretty subtle, so but if that's high you can also add some ambient occlusion there, for example. The next question we have is, are we going to make these bricks greener? We are in the woods and we will probably not be using the ambient light from a 3D render engine, for example Sketchfab, but we're going to upload this model too. So it's a choice we have to make. We can add the ambient lighting here in the model. It depends a little bit if you want to be cheap or not. For example, Sketchfab, when you want to use VR, you really need to be cheap, and then it's better to draw it in here. If you use something like Unreal Engine, for example, you can also use the ambient lighting from the engine itself. As said, Sketchfab is pretty good in rendering real time, but in VR it's just lagging a little bit at the moment. I tried this on Oculus Quest, and with the more complex models it really started jagging around. So let's make this choice now and let's just draw it in, and let's keep it as cheap as possible. So we're on the soft brush. Let's pick a color. Let's pick a green color. Here, and let's zoom in a bit, like so, and it's on mix now. Let's try that. Oh, let's make sure occlude and backface culling is turned off or on. Oh, it should be on, of course. So let's turn those on, Control Z, and turn occlude and backface culling on again. Let's test it. Yep, I'm not going through everything. Always have to test that. Okay, we'll go and add some color here. We are green. We are on mix. Okay, let's put it on color. Let's put a multiply first. Let's see. It's making it darker. So let's do it on. Go to color and add it in there. Okay, that's a little bit too green maybe, so what we can do is we can just neutralize the color a bit. Control Z and neutralize the color which is going to gray, as you might remember from previous lectures. So you see that that's already better. Let's do it a little bit more. Okay, I like that. It's not the end result yet, but we'll see. Let's use this for now. So you can follow me along, but I'll speed up the video now. I'll color in all these lighter parts. Don't be too precise because we're using the soft brush and we're using color as blend mode. So if you miss parts, it's not a problem. Or if you paint on parts that you don't want to be greener, it's not really noticeable. So I'll speed up the video now and see you back afterwards. Our well model is almost finished. The painting is almost done, but I like to add some more. I'd like to add some darkness on the bottom here, because mostly the bottom of a well or a brick wall like this is a lot darker. Okay, anyway, let's choose the gradient now, but there's a little bug in this version of Blender, but we'll try a workaround and we'll get through it. Okay, let's start. So let's first turn off occlude and backface culling, so we can paint through the complete model again, which I believe is not really necessary with gradients, come to think of it, but okay. Now the bug we have in this version of Blender is when unified strength is turned on and you go to gradient, the unified strength is off, so it doesn't give you what you want. Probably this bug is gone in version 2.83 and up, because I did fill in a bug report and they acknowledged it. But I'm in 2.82 at this moment, so it's still there. So let's go to the bucket tool or the fill tool. And instead of color, go to gradient. And here we have a gradient. It goes from black to white, or transparent in this case. So turn the alpha all the way up. Normally it's like this. Black and white, I already played with it, so. But what we want is we want a gradient from green to transparent. So again, let's turn this on transparent. Again, like so, all the way down. Those tiny black squares mean transparent. Let's click on the black side and make that green. We can color pick it with this thing here. Now it's nice and green. And now it's set on 0.7 strength, but when I drag a line here, which gives the direction of the gradient, you can see it's way too light. This is not 0.7. So let's do Control Z, and now when I turn off unified strength, you see that it's on 0.1. That's more what I was looking at. You see when I do this again, this is 10% of the ink we have. So let's keep it off and put it on 1 or 100% strength. You can see that there as well. When you drag now, you see that's more like it. When it's on multiply, it should be dark as this. So when you use the brush and have unified strength turned on, and then go to the fill tool, turn it off because the strength will not give the correct value. So that's all about the bug in version 2.82 and below. Let's go to front view, hit 6 a couple of times, and remember we have occlude and backface culling turned off, which isn't really necessary, but anyway. And let's make this gradient. And let's just try it a couple of times until we have something that we want. Remember that this part is underneath the ground, so maybe we should make it a little bit higher anyway. So again, numpad 1, shift numpad 6 a couple of times. An angle of 45 degrees, which isn't necessary, I found out later, but doesn't really matter for now. Let's go and do something like this. That's Still not high enough, I guess. Again. Oops. Again. Let's take about 2 bricks high. Okay, that's cool, but I think it's too dark. It should be greener. So Control Z again. Iteration, you know, that's the way it works. Let's make it lighter. And again. Wow, there you go. That looks like it's wet and moist, right? And if you want, you can always make it even bigger. For example, something like this. Okay, I'll leave it like this and continue. Okay, and I have one last trick for you, and that's when you make it a game with a certain perspective, because we are in a perspective now that's something like this. That's something what we're aiming for now. But if you want to make a game with an orthographic top-down view, like this, you can improve the readability of the game by making a gradient from the bottom to the top, from dark to light. As you remember, dark is far away and light is close. You can also do it in this perspective, but it doesn't really make sense to me. So we'll use it only in games with an orthographic view. So let's turn this to black. And then let's go to side view again. And drag all the way over it. It's pretty extreme, it's just to illustrate. You can see better what's up and down when you look at the orthographic perspective. And readability is very important in games. If you can improve that, that's always a very good thing to do. Because there's a lot to see in games, and doing small things like this really helps the gamer to see what's going on the screen. I'll undo it because we don't really need that for this project. And now for the rendering, because we're rendering this out as a shadeless model, we will have to go to the shading option and make sure that the shader is set on emission. So in the shader, the texture, that's this one, goes to the emission, and the emission goes to the output, to the material output. Now let's make sure you save your texture, because we're going to render, and often, if anywhere, Blender crashes, it is during rendering. Now let's go to the shader menu and make sure it's on viewport shading, render it. Now let's hit Alt A to deselect everything. You have to hover over the viewport if you do that. And now let's add a principled BSDF shader. It's a non-emissive shader, and just to illustrate the difference between a emissive shader and a non-emissive shader, you can see there's no shadows now, but when I use the non-emissive shader, so just the base color of the model, and add that to the output here, you see we have a hard edge here at the edges. It's also darker, of course, because it doesn't emit any light. And there's not much light in the scene either. So it gives sort of like the hard edges you see here in the mesh as well. So a cheap way to get rid of those shadows, those hard edges, is to make your model emit light or emit its color. That way the model doesn't catch any shadows and the edges are eliminated. So let's make a render. You might remember it from previous lectures where we also made a render. We have a render menu here, but let's leave it for what it is. That's okay. Let's just hit render image. After you rendered it, save it and upload it to the Q&A if you want, so you can ask for comments. Again, keep it nice when you give comments. We are all very kind people, right? Now just put the previous and this render next to each other so you can see the progress. I'm looking forward to your renders and see you in the next lecture. Bye bye.